On Apple 16's website, they have a really cool section where as you're scrolling, the effect on the image is changing as you're scrolling, as if you are applying a cool effect. And then when you're scrolling out, it kind of zooms out and gets round corners. And I thought, how about we do this in Webflow? However, while Apple has gazillion developers to code these kind of cool effects for them, we want to do it on our own without any code so that we can do it on our own in a fairly short amount of time. That's what we use Webflow for, right? So this tutorial is going to be a little bit on the intermediate advanced level. We're going to cover things like sticky position, absolute position, masking. So it's going to be lots of fun. If you're new to Webflow, you might want to check out our intro course or of course the Webflow masterclass. But if you're ready, let's break this down. Now, I want to break this down to tutorials. Instead of jumping into Webflow and show you step by step how to do this, I want you to really understand how to think about this. And usually when I try to do complicated interactions like this, I plan them out either in Keynote or in Figma before just to figure out what I need to do before I jump right into Webflow. So here's a Figma file, and I want to try to explain my thinking here. So when I'm looking at the Apple website, we have a normal text section here. And then we've got this special section here, which as we're scrolling, the image is scrolling and then it becomes stuck, right? So this is a sticky position. And then as we're scrolling through basically 3 sections, then we're moving back into the third next text section. So how would we structure this? So we've got the first text section and we've got the third text section, but what happens in the middle in the special section? Well, as I've mentioned, it feels like 3 different sections. So let's make this a really long section. And basically, let's say if there's an image here, let's put the image here on the front. What happens is as we're scrolling through this, we feel as if when the image gets here, the image basically sticks and then we can keep scrolling on, but the image stays in the frame. This basically means that we'll need to structure this as a sticky section. So that means that this whole long section, we're going to need a wrapper, a sticky wrapper that's going to be 3 times the normal screen size. And inside of it, it's going to hold some kind of a wrapper for what's going on in the image. So this already tells us how we need to structure this inside of Webflow. Now, what happens in the image section? Well, once this image is on the screen, basically the images are positioned one on top of the other, perfectly positioned this way. And then let's move this perfectly positioned here, and then this one perfectly. And as we're scrolling, basically it's being masked out, okay? However, and this is the tricky stuff, as these images are being masked out, you can see that if I change the mask here in Figma, the image kind of moves. But what we need to happen is, as we're moving this, if I double click on the image here and change this from fill to crop, basically need to change only the mask, but the position of the image stays in place. So this is exactly the effect that we want to achieve. And of course, we'll use while scrolling into view to do this masking effect, but we've had a few things that we've mentioned here. Number 1, we need to position the images one on top of the other, exactly perfectly positioned. To do that, we'll need to use absolute positioning because that allows us to layer different div blocks one on top of the other ones. And then we'll have to change the mask. Okay, so I hope that you basically realize the kind of structure that we need to have here. Let's see how we're going to implement this in Webflow. Now I have this starter project here that basically includes this text section in the top and this bottom section with the text here. If you want this starter file, it's below this video along with images I generated with AI, so I'm not using Apple's actual imagery. And now let's see how we're going to tackle the interesting section in between. So first of all, I'm going to add a new section. I'm using the shortcut Command E to just write here section and add a section, not inside, but actually in between them, right? So I've got a new section and let's call this is basically going to be the long section that holds the sticky element. So let's call this sticky wrapper, just so that we know what this thing is. And what we need to have for this section is we need it to be really, really high so that we can scroll through all of this area. So for the height, I'm going to set this as 300 viewport height, which is VH. This basically means 100 viewport height means the whole screen. And then if I do this 300, that basically means 3 screens. Okay, so now you can see I've set it to 300 VH. And as I'm scrolling, you can see here on the scroll slider, there's scroll, scroll, scroll before we're getting to the final section below. So we have now 3 screen sizes to scroll through. So that's the first step. That's great. Now inside of it, let's bring in the sticky section itself. So I'm going to add another div inside of this sticky wrapper. And this one, I'm going to call this sticky section. And just so that we can, and this sticky section needs to fill up the whole screen, right? So this one is just going to be 100 viewport height, okay? So this is how we set it, just so that we can see it because it's white on white. Let's change the background color here just for a color, just so that we can see something, okay? And now, as you can see, if I'm scrolling through this, we have one section of red, and then we're continuing to the other 2 sections which are empty, right? Because this section is not sticky yet. So how are we going to turn this into a sticky section? We're going to go here into the, right here, into the positioning and change static into sticky. And I'm going to set the top to 0 because basically I want 0 space from the top. Here I can set when it's going to start sticking to the top. And in my case, I want this to reach the top of the website with no gap this way, and then it's stuck. Now you can see that it's, as I'm scrolling down, and you can see here, the scroll bar here, the section is stuck here until we're getting to the bottom, and then it's being released. Okay, so I've got the sticky section. Now let's bring in the images inside. Okay, so for the images, what we actually need is we need 3 mask layers so that we can stack them one on top of the other. So let's create the first one. Let's add a div and call this mask layer, just so that we know what this is. Mask layer. And what do we need in this mask layer? First of all, we need it to fill up the whole screen, right? So let's set it to 100% viewport height. And we also, because we want this to be a mask, we need to set the overflow to hidden, meaning as we're going to animate the size of this, it's not going to show what's happening inside. And we'll see this, how this applies in a few minutes. And also let's set the viewport height to 100%. Okay, so now we've basically got the mask here. And for this one, I want to make sure that I am giving it a Z index, right? So absolute positioning, and let's set the Z index here to 1. Now I'm going to need 3 of this with 3 different Z index. The Z index is of course the layer of, this element. So I'm just going to copy and paste it 3 times, and I'm going to actually add a combo class here so that if I need to make changes to the original class, I'll be able to do it to mask layers. So let's call this mask2. And the only thing that's going to change here is I'm going to set the Z index to number 2. And then on the third one, I'm going to call this mask3. And what I'm going to change here is the Z index to 3. So now we've got 3 different masks. That's great. Now let's bring in the image inside of this layer. Now, basically, intuitively, what I thought we can do is just bring in an image inside, right? And I can do this by adding an image inside, and this image, let's go ahead and choose one of the images that we have here, for example, this one. And now let's see how the masking works, right? So if I go back to the masking layer and I start changing the size, then you can see that it's actually not really what I'm looking for because it's actually resizing the image. I want the image to stay in a fixed size and just being cropped. I don't want the image to actually be resized. So let's bring this to 100 and let's just make sure, let's give a class to the image and call this fixed image. And just make sure that the size of this is just 100% viewport width. So it's always going to be the size of the window, right, that we're on. Now what happens if I change the layer mask? Let's change the size. Well, it's still resizing, which is exactly my problem. So I guess putting an image inside is not what we want. And the way that we're going to solve this is instead of bringing an image, we're going to bring a div in which we're going to give a background image, and that's going to allow us a little bit more control. So let's name this image background just so that we know what we want to do with this, and go into backgrounds and add an image here. And let's add this as the first layer. Now, obviously, we don't see much, so we need to give this a size. And I'm going to give this a height of 100 viewport height because I want this to fill up the whole screen. Now, what we wanted to do is to make sure that the size stays fixed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the image, and for size, I'm going to set it to custom and set it to 100% viewport width, no matter what the size of the container is. And actually, you know what? Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to make sure that it's positioned to the right side because we're going to animate the image from the right side to the left. So we want to make sure that it's animating this way. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how that looks. Let's see if that works. I'm going to go into the mask layer and I'm going to change the width here. Yep, now it's animating nicely. The image is not moving, and I can animate from 0 to 100. Okay, so that looks great. Now all I need to do is basically duplicate what I did here with the two other layers. So let's copy the background image and paste it inside of the second mask layer and in the third mask layer, and go back here. Now to change, I can't just change an image here because this is the image is applied to the class image background. So let's give this a combo class of image2 and now change this to the second layer using this color. And on the third layer, let's do the same. Call this image 3 and then change this to the black and white image. Okay, so basically what we have right now is 3 layers. Let's play around with the masks so that we can see this, right? In the third mask layer, if we move this or change the size, okay, we've got the third layer, which is visible right now. And here on the second layer, second mask, we can play around with that. Now we can see all 3 layers at the same time. But of course, we want to start out seeing the first mask, layer 1, and the layer 2 and layer 3 should be hidden. So let's go ahead and change their width to 0, and then third one to 0. And now let's go ahead and create the interaction. But one thing that I see as I'm scrolling here is that the image is not filling up the whole screen, and it's kind of, it's kind of tiling in here. So let's go into the original background image. Let's go into the image here and maybe make sure that the height is 100% viewport height. Yeah. So this one, actually, let's remove this. Let's set this to auto, I think, because we want to make sure it fills the screen, even if it's cropped a little bit, should be fine, and should also apply these changes to layer 2 and layer 3 because they are the same class, image background. Okay, let's go ahead and animate this. How are we going to animate this? Basically, we want, the sticky wrapper while it's scrolling in view. So let's go into the interactions panel. Let's add an element interaction, and let's do while scrolling in view. I'm going to go ahead and create a new interaction, add that here. Let's call this image masking for sure. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to let's start out with layer number 2. I'm going to select it here, and I'm going to animate its size. And we know that it's starting from size of 0 viewport width, and then it's animating. We want to animate it into 100 viewport width, actually. Okay, great. Now I can turn on live preview, and as I'm scrolling here, you can see that even before I get into the just because of the way that we structured this, even at the top of the website, we're actually at 14%. So obviously we need to take the 0 down a little bit so that it would only start the animation when we're getting, no, this is even too early. We want the animation to start right here, actually at 27. So we want to make sure that it's still 0 to 27. Okay, fantastic. And then let's play this. So we're scrolling, and once we're getting into the sticky position, now we're starting to animate. But right now it's animating all the way 3 sections, and that's not what we want. So let's make sure that this finishes somewhere around the middle so that we will be able to see all the 3 of them, right? So let's go ahead and check this out. Now it's scrolling. We're animating the second layer. And here, probably, maybe in 47, let's put this in 47. Let's start to animate mask number 3. So let's choose that and edit the mask. We'll actually start this from here and make sure that in 48 it's still 0 viewport width. And then let's go ahead and duplicate this. And then I'm assuming we need to end the animation around 70. We'll see this in a second. Here it's going to be 100% or 100 viewport width. Let's test this out now. So now we're scrolling. First mask number 2 is animating, and when it's getting to the end, mask number 3 is animating. And we've got this really nice effect. And as we get to the end, actually the end of the section is only around here, 78%. Okay, so let's move the last layer to 78%. I'm not sure it's really in the middle. Maybe we want to move these to, let's say to 50 if we feel like that's more in the middle. So they will be animating in the same speed. So getting in here, animating 1, animating 2. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got the core of the interaction done, and that was pretty cool. Now let's do the end of the interaction, which is when we get to the end, this whole section, it's masking out, getting a little bit smaller, or the mask is cropping and it's getting these very cool round corner, which we can achieve this effect of things becoming round using Webflow variables. So that's going to be pretty cool. So let's see how we do that. First of all, in order to do that, what we're going to want to animate is the sticky wrapper. Let's see what happens if we go here and add border round corners. Let's say this is 50. And if we do that, we don't see that, because in order to see that, we'll need to probably clip the overflow. Now, I can't do overflow hidden, which is usually what we're using for masking, because if we'll do that, the sticky position won't work. So that's one more kind of like a weird thing about HTML, CSS, that kind of thing. If you're using overflow hidden to mask things out, you can't do that and sticky position at the same time. And that's why Webflow added this clip property, which is pretty cool. So now you can see that if I add corner radius, that's going to crop it nicely. However, unfortunately, using Webflow interaction, I cannot animate this property specifically, the corner radius. It's just, we can't see it in the animation panel, but what we can is we can animate variables. So instead of using a fixed number of pixels here, we can go ahead and create a new variable. So let's go ahead and create a variable. Let's call this round corner. And let's start with 0, because we want to animate it from 0 to something like 50 or something like this. So now we've got the round corner as variable here. Okay, and the other thing we want to do is we want to scale this whole thing down, maybe. And for that, we're going to use something like the 3D transform. Right here, there is scale, and we're going to animate this to maybe 0.9 or something like this. Yeah, this looks good. And this can be animated from the animations panel. So let's go ahead and create another interaction here. Now, technically, I can add this to this interaction, but sometimes when you try to animate too many properties in Webflow, it's a little bit, the animations are clashing. So I'm just going to open up another one while this is scrolling in view, and I'm going to call this animation section animation. Scale corners, whatever, just a name that I know what it means. Now, in this case, what we want to animate, first of all, let's figure out when we want this to happen, probably starting somewhere around 70, where we remember that we get to the end of it. So let's go ahead and for the sticky wrapper, let's add a scale transform. And again, start this from somewhere around 70. And we're going to start this from 1, which is basically 100%, is by default. And then we want to scale this down to 0.9, let's say. Let's test this out. So I've turned on live preview and I'm scrolling. And when we get to the end, maybe it's actually starting a little bit earlier. So maybe we want this to start here, 81, when the sticky position is actually being released. So let's test this now. We're scrolling, and when we get to the end, you can see that it's, yeah. But let's bring this up further so that we can actually see this animation. So we're getting to the end, and then it's animating. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Now the section is animating. Okay, so now let's add the round corner property. Let's go here just so that we have this 81% and add one more animation. In this case, you can see set variable value. So let's choose that. And let's choose for the variable the round corners. And we're going to start from 0 pixels. That's okay. Let's go ahead and duplicate this and take this to the end. And here we're going to set this to 50 pixels. Let's live preview this. And now as we're scrolling down, I actually can't see the animation of the... Why can't I see the animation of the round corners? Let's preview this here and see if this works. Okay. Ooh, so now we have a problem. Now when I'm previewing it, I can see that the size of my image is not... Well, we'll fix this in a second, but the masking works. And then as I'm scrolling, the round corners do not work. So this seems like a weird little glitch in the interactions from Webflow, but I think I know how to solve this. I think that the problem is animating from 0 to 50. Let's see what happens if I try to animate the round corners from 1 pixels instead of 0 to 50. Let's see if that works. Now I'm scrolling, and yeah, I think now this solves the problem. So let's save this and let's preview this. And let's see if that works now. So we've got the masking animation, and yep, now the round corners animation works well. So a quick little bug, I guess, but we've found a way to work around this. The only thing I want to fix here is the sizing of the image, which doesn't look good. And I think I've struggled with this initially, where I go to the background image and its sizing. Initially, I set it to 100%. I wanted it to fill the whole screen in terms of the width. And then it didn't fill it in terms of the height. And now I try to fill it in terms of the height, but it's not, because of course the image is not in the exact proportions of my screen. So I think what I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to set this to auto. I'm just going to make sure that it's bigger than the screen. So let's make it 110 viewport width so that I'm sure it's cropping a little bit. And then I think it's going to be okay. Let's preview this. Okay, so now I've made the image for sure bigger than the screen size, and it looks great. The masking works, and then as I scroll through, round corner and the section zooms. Yeah, and I think that concludes this very cool effect. I hope you learned a lot about how to use Webflow and think about things creatively and work around Webflow's feature and what you want to achieve. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.